Hello and welcome. Hello, Agus Falcha. My name is Alex Dray. In Scotland, there are no lighthouse keepers. All lights are automatic and were becoming so when I was in the lighthouse service. The last keeper retired in 1998. I was a keeper for a short period between 1978 and 1979. During that time, I saw service on 5 different lighthouses. In this video, I want to tell you about the basics of a lighthouse. The men, the hours of work, what makes the light flash and the foghorn. And I emphasise that it was men and not men and women. I'm afraid the Equality Act never quite reached the lighthouse service. There are essentially 2 types of lighthouse station. One that's on the mainland and one that isn't. I served in one mainland lighthouse, the Mull of Galloway. The keepers lived with their families in cottages that were situated within a lighthouse compound. Keepers were on duty to a timetable, and life was pretty much no different to that of anyone else. It was just like a regular job, only a bit different. However, the second type of lighthouse station was fundamentally different. It was called a rock station and could be just that, a rock with a lighthouse perched on top. I was never on one like that. The most famous is probably the Bell Rock Lighthouse, though there are a couple of others. Most rocks, though, were on islands. Some were very small, but islands nevertheless. I served on Sanda, which is just off the south end of the Mull of Kintyre, Rhuval, which was on Isla, Barrowhead, the most southerly point of the Outer Hebrides, and Inchkeith in the Firth of Forth. Most islands were uninhabited, though Rhuval on Isla was an exception. But it was so remote that it was effectively just as uninhabited because it had no path, never mind road, connecting it to any of the villages. Each light had 3 keepers, usually a principal keeper and 2 assistant keepers at any one time. We were often flown out to the lighthouses by helicopter. I always found this exciting, though it was very cold and very noisy inside the helicopter. It was 4 weeks on, then 4 weeks off. When you were there, it was a 7-day-week job for the whole of the 4 weeks. There were 5 shifts that rotated between the 3 keepers: 6 a.m. to noon, noon to 6 p.m., 6 p.m. to 10 p.m., 10 p.m. to 2 a.m., 2 a.m. to 6 a.m. Then it all started again. During your shift, you had to keep the light going if it was on, note passing ships or anything else of interest, and record and report the weather. Reporting the weather wasn't straightforward. You had to know your clouds and be able to estimate percentages of each. You had to know sea states. You had to be able to gauge distances for visibility. You had to collect and collate data on barometric pressure, rain, wind, temperatures, maximum and minimum, and many other bits and pieces that made up the weather report. If you weren't on shift, your day was often taken up with cleaning, painting, keeping the grounds in excellent condition. Cooking was shared. It depended on who was on duty at any given mealtime as to who would be the cook. And pity the other 2 when it was my turn. Most people tend to think that it must have been very lonely. But I can't remember ever being lonely. I always took lots of books, and every lighthouse had its own small library. I also remember that other keepers often had hobbies or projects that they could get on with. Now, the light. Most lights were powered by paraffin. We'd have to carry jerry cans of paraffin up to the light room and fill a cylinder that was connected to another cylinder. The second cylinder was then pressurized by pumping it up. This forced a vapor of paraffin up through a series of pipes to a mantle, which was then lit. It was essentially a huge Tilly lamp. Tilly lamps aren't exactly common nowadays, but if you look it up, it's fairly easy to see how it would have worked. But the light itself didn't go on and off. It simply stayed on. And every so often, about every 30 minutes or so, the keeper would need to pump up the air cylinder to keep the paraffin vapour under pressure and the light burning. To create the flash, there was a huge glass prism that revolved in rollers. The light was inside the prism. It was so big that we'd be able to go inside this huge piece of glass to light the mantle. If you're ever in the Museum of Scotland in Edinburgh, the prism from Inchkeith is there as an exhibit. I used to service this light, and seeing it always brings back memories. Some good, but some not so good. But that's another story. Anyway, if you were in a plane flying overhead, you would see the beam of light going round in a circle. But if you were at ground level or on a ship at sea, it would appear as a flash. And from the number of flashes per minute, you'd be able to tell which lighthouse was flashing and so work out your position at sea. Every lighthouse had a different sequence or number of flashes. This was called its signature or characteristic. To turn this massive prism, there was a mechanism very similar to what you'd find inside a grandfather clock. A weight hung down the middle of the lighthouse, and it was this weight, slowly descending, that supplied the power to make the prism turn. But it needed winding up every so often, and again, the keeper would need to do this. I've climbed a lot of steps. Now, not every lighthouse had a foghorn, but many had. The horns were powered by compressed air. Within the lighthouse compound, there would be an engine room. Now, the engine room, like everywhere in the lighthouse, was pristine. The tiniest speck of dirt was an endangered species. The engines that powered the foghorn had to be exceptionally powerful, and the Kelvin diesels that were used were just that. The engines would be powered up, and once the pressure reached a critical point, a valve was opened. You'd hear and feel the surge of air as it rushed through the 8-inch pipes out of the engine room and down towards the foghorn. The sound of the horn could be heard miles away, but if you were close, it didn't blow out your eardrums. However, if you went into the tiny housing that most horns sat upon, when the horn sounded, it wasn't your ears that got a bashing, it was your insides. Everything vibrated. It was the weirdest of feelings. And it happened because the compressed air, when it reached the foghorn, caused an enormous rubber diaphragm to vibrate and so create that unforgettable sound. And in a similar way to the lighthouse light, the foghorn would sound a set number of times a minute. Its signature, again, letting seafarers know exactly where they were. If you've enjoyed this short video and would like to know more, especially about my personal experiences in the lighthouse service, I hope that once the COVID-19 lockdown has ended, I'll be able to give a more detailed talk in the Harbour Arts Centre, Irvine. Or if you can't wait and want to read about my experiences, go to my website, www.alexdrain.yolasite.com. The Alex Drain is all one word, as is Yolasite, that's spelled Iolasite. Send me your email address on the contact form and I'll send you a free PDF copy. Thank you for watching. Goodbye.